This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with AutoQuote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Hi, this is Joe from Vanta. In today's digital world, compliance regulations are changing constantly, and earning customer trust has never mattered more. Vanta helps companies get compliant fast and stay secure with the most advanced AI, automation, and continuous monitoring out there. So whether you're a startup going for your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or a growing enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta makes it quick, easy, and scalable. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. Get started at Vanta.com.
I have been pregnant twice. And one of the most disorienting things about the experience, both times, was how being pregnant seemed to change the people around me. Like when I went to the doctor, I was the person in the waiting room, the person getting my blood drawn. But the patient, that wasn't me. That was my unborn kid. Sometimes, like during an ultrasound, this shift felt benign. Other times, not so much. Like when I went into labor and wanted to avoid taking a drug to speed things up. I was told if I didn't hurry, my baby could end up in intensive care. This was not true, but it reflected this idea. The idea that my point of view was secondary. The idea that I was at best a vehicle for my baby. And in this vehicle, I was definitely not the driver. I've been thinking about that feeling over the past week or so because of this story unfolding in Atlanta. It's about a pregnant woman and who has control over her body. The woman's name is Adriana Smith.
Tonight, a Metro Atlanta mother lies brain dead in a hospital room, being kept alive only because she's pregnant.
So her case.
Adriana Smith is this 30-year-old Black nurse from the Metro Atlanta area. She has one child who's 7 years old. And in February, she began experiencing these severe headaches.
Imani Gandy has been reporting on Adriana's story for Rewire News Group.
So she went to a hospital and they just sent her home with some medication. So then the next morning, her boyfriend heard her sort of gasping for air, and she was rushed to the hospital, and doctors discovered that she had multiple blood clots in her brain. And so at first they thought they were going to be able to operate, but then they called her family back and said that they weren't going to be able to operate. So she was declared brain dead, I believe, on February 19th. And at that time, she was 9 weeks pregnant.
Adriana Smith has been on life support ever since.
Adriana has been on a ventilator for the past 90 days. She was moved here just hours ago so doctors can deliver her baby when it is time. Her family visits her every day, including her young son, who believes his mom is just sleeping.
The problem is Georgia's web of laws that recognize Adriana's fetus as a person in and of itself. Now Adriana's mother is watching her daughter's pregnancy develop, knowing her daughter can't survive.
And I just want to be clear on something. We want her to have her baby. We want her life to continue throughout her children. But at the same time, to see her lay there like that, for that length of time, the grieving process for us, it can't even start.
She's had to start a GoFundMe. The last I checked, they were asking for $275,000 because, there's not only was she not given a choice, but then she had this choice foisted upon her and then she has to pay for it. It seems to me that she just wants a choice, right? She wants to have been involved in the decision to keep her daughter on life support.
You're an attorney, right?
I am, yes.
Does her family have a choice, legally speaking?
Well, that's what's so interesting about it. What I think is going on is sort of institutional cowardice, right? And this sort of legal paranoia that isn't really warranted.
But in some cases might make sense if you're covering your ass, I guess.
Exactly. That's exactly right. The hospital isn't keeping Adriana on life support because they have to legally. So it seems like they're just in CYA mode.
Today on the show, is what's going on in this Atlanta hospital a sign of where the fight over reproductive rights is headed? I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. And that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Hi, it's Willa Paskin, the host of Decoder Ring, a show about cracking cultural mysteries. I want to tell you about a new episode of ours that's all about spring break. Spring break is notoriously a time when college kids head somewhere warm and go nuts. And they've been doing it for decades with the help of Florida beach towns, hit movies, and MTV.
It was Sodom and Gomorrah. They are in bathing suits and bikinis. They are drinking their ass off. They couldn't be more excited to be on and part of MTV.
Where did this rite of passage begin? How crazy did spring break get? How much has it transformed? And why do we keep doing it? If, in fact, we do. Find out now on Slate's Decoder Ring, wherever you get your podcasts.
What have you been able to learn about Adriana Smith herself? Like who she was before she was this symbol?
I mean, well, that's part of the thing, right? Is that I don't really know who she was before she became this symbol. All I know is that she's a 30-year-old Black woman from Atlanta who has a 7-year-old child that she was trying to raise. And I think that's sort of indicative of the way that these sort of abortion porn stories become more about the sort of rhetoric than it is about the person. Meanwhile, Adriana Smith is dead, sitting in a hospital being kept alive, and her son is sitting by her bedside thinking that she's been asleep this whole time, right?
Yeah, that was the detail that really stood out to me, that her family has just told her son she's asleep.
That's just a horrifying trauma to inflict on a child.
Yeah, but of course, like, what else do you do? You know what I mean? Like, what else would you tell him?
There's not much that you can tell a 7-year-old that's going to make them understand. And I think the fact that we don't know much about Adriana is part of the problem, is that we're not viewing, I think both sides have that problem of not viewing these people as people, but viewing them as sort of political tools to highlight whatever message that you're trying to send. There are people on the pro-choice side who are saying this is unfair and this is what the 6-week ban has wrought. And there are people on the other side who are blaming the pro-choice people for being ghouls and talking about how they definitely want to take her off life support.
So tell me about the laws that are in play here, because I know there are a couple of them and they're overlapping. What is the legal justification if I'm the hospital, which I guess is the decider here, for keeping Adriana Smith alive?
I mean, the only thing that I can think of is that the Life Act, right, the Living Infants Fairness and Equality Act, which was enacted by Georgia in 2019, it bans abortion after quote unquote fetal heartbeat is detected, which is just cardiac activity, but it bans abortion at about 6 weeks. But it also confers fetal personhood onto fertilized embryos, which means essentially in the state of Georgia, a fertilized embryo is the same as a grown person. And then if you look at the advanced directive law only voids an advanced directive if the fetus is viable. A 9-week fetus isn't viable. So the advanced directive law doesn't apply.
On May 16th, Georgia's Attorney General released a statement saying there is nothing in the Life Act that requires medical professionals to keep a woman on life support after brain death. Removing life support is not an action with the purpose to terminate a pregnancy. On the other hand, The sponsor of the Life Act, State Senator Ed Setzler, has explicitly told reporters that he believes the hospital is acting appropriately, and he'd be thankful if the Living Infants Fairness and Equality Act played a small part in keeping Adriana's pregnancy viable. In any case, it seems that Adriana's doctors have chosen to keep her in their care.
But at a certain point, it seems to me that hospitals are money-making enterprises, and I understand they want to do whatever they can to avoid criminal liability, to avoid civil liability, because all of that will interfere with their business. But at what point does a hospital look at the law? Does a hospital attorney look at the law and say, you know what, this law is nonsense, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to care more about the dignity of the patient over some potential local prosecutor or a DA or the attorney general going back on their word? Someone has to stand up for people like Adriana Smith, or we're just going to keep seeing this over and over.
The hospital said they want to keep her on life support until August, which seems like a very long time.
Until she's 32 weeks pregnant.
It's well into the third trimester.
It's a ridiculous long time. Keeping her on life support until 32 weeks. They've moved her to a different hospital, Emory Midtown, which apparently has a better obstetrics department. But like, what are we doing, right? Whether she's 9 weeks pregnant or whether she's 22 weeks pregnant, the fact of the matter is I've done research on gestating fetuses in brain dead people, and a lot of these fetuses don't survive. There's like a handful of cases where the fetuses have survived, and most of them have been between 18 and 26 weeks. But really the through line of all of these, the through line in some of these cases is that it was the family's choice to have the person continue to gestate that fetus, right? They were given an opportunity to say yes or no. And then the other huge through line is every case that I've come across, those countries have universal health care, right? So if they make the choice to continue to gestate the fetus and keep the person on life support, they're not going to end up with the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 bill at the end of it, which is going to, put them in medical bankruptcy and then make it difficult to raise the child if the child survives, and then make it even more difficult if the child survives with disabilities, which is what Adriana's mother, April Newkirk, is concerned about. I get the sense that if Adriana's family wasn't being forced to try to raise all of this money on GoFundMe, they might have been able to have a real conversation about what it is they want, about if this child is born with, fluid in its brain or might end up being blind or not able to walk, which is what April Newkirk has been saying might be the case. Then they can make a decision about what it would be like to raise a child with disabilities and whether there are public programs and public assistance that would enable them to do that and to raise that child in a healthy environment.
The whole reason we're talking about Adriana's case is because her family, they say they have no choice in her medical care now. But looking at what happened to Adriana, I'm really struck by the fact that the family seems equally, if not more, upset about the medical care Adriana received before she ended up on life support, which is she had these headaches. She was so concerned about them as a nurse that she went to the hospital where she was given painkillers, told to go home, never given a CT scan, which would have shown what was happening with her and maybe given them a chance to act on what they saw. This happens so often with women of color, where their symptoms aren't taken seriously. And that really stands out to me, too.
That stood out to me as well. There's a reason why whenever I go to the doctor, I get dressed. I'm practically in a business suit because I want to be taken seriously. And the fact of the matter is, women, as you said, generally aren't taken seriously. And then Black women even more so. Just the inherent biases that people have, coupled with the outright medical, falsities that they're taught at med school, to the point where some med students think that Black people have different nerves. I mean, Robert Kennedy Jr. said something similar about how Black people are just different. And so we absorb vaccines differently. I mean, there are people who think that Black people don't feel pain as much because we have different nerve endings. There are people who automatically view Black people when they go to the doctor as drug seekers. So it's hard to get doctors to admit that this bias exists. And so it's hard to figure out a way to sort of close that medical racist gap when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, you're a lawyer. I'm curious if Adriana's family came to you and asked for legal advice, what you'd tell them.
I would tell them to sue the hospital. I would tell them to sue the hospital. I would tell them to go and try to get an injunction against the hospital, forcing them to maintain her on life support. But again, that costs money, and that costs money that this family may not have. And at a time when you are grieving the death of your daughter, having to also at the same time go to court and ask a judge to let your daughter die it's just compounding trauma on top of trauma.
Well, and especially when you might want the baby she's carrying.
Right. So, right. I mean, certainly the documents you would file, the facts that you would attach to whatever document you filed would reflect what the family wants. And I think it's almost even a better case to say, look, we're not even necessarily particularly in a state like Georgia, we're not even necessarily trying to remove her from life support. We just want the choice, A, and B, if we're not given the choice, then we shouldn't be forced to absorb that cost.
After the break, could Adriana's case set a precedent all over the country?
So car headlights are glaring like never before. If you've noticed, it's not your imagination. But relatively few people are trying to do anything about it. And almost no one is trying to do as much about it as Paul Gatto.
I would like to not be blinded at night, and I would like to be not in danger of hitting someone because I'm blinded. I would really like that.
Paul is a software developer from Newfoundland, and he did not grow up with any particular interest in headlights, or really even cars. But that all changed dramatically in the late 2010s.
The real way that I kind of got into this whole sphere was dating someone who was a pedestrian who was hit by a car.
Paul's girlfriend Liz was crossing the street at a crosswalk when a taxi cab struck her, flinging her several feet in the air.
If it hadn't been a sedan that hit her, she would be dead.
She sustained serious injuries to her hip and shoulder, which required the insertion of a metal plate.
She was able to make a very, very good recovery, especially how bad the accident was. But that being said, she's a violinist. She was a violinist, and she made a lot of money teaching and doing concerts. And the metal plate in her arm prevents her from actually holding the violin up in that position comfortably for any length of time.
Paul and Liz only got together after the accident. But watching what she went through in its aftermath completely changed his perspective on cars.
Seeing her go through the court proceedings and the recovery and everything, and almost being blamed the entire time, despite being a victim, that really radicalized me against the car-centrism of our world.
And it was as he was being radicalized that he started to notice he was constantly getting glared by other cars' headlights.
It almost brought out a new side of my personality that I'd never seen before, which is just unspeakable rage. And I never considered myself to be one of those guys who would full testosterone, just road raging all the time, just flipping off every little thing. But when these lights are in my face, suddenly the only thing I can think about is that I'm going to put someone in the same position Liz was in.
He was enraged because he was afraid of what a pair of headlights might cause him to do. And he was also infuriated because the person with the headlights would have no idea about the harm they'd done.
I think, you know what, they're going to drive off perfectly fine from this interaction. I might hit somebody and they will never know.
Paul soon found himself thinking and talking about headlights all the time.
I'd absolutely pissed off a couple friends because every time I'd have a couple beers, I start complaining about it. Just like looking at the windows like, God, can you believe those? Just becoming an old man about it.
Paul wanted to do more, though, and to find people to do it with. And then in 2022, he came across a subreddit about headlights with only a single member. Paul took one look at its name and thought it could be the platform he was looking for. He emailed asking to become a moderator.
I messaged him saying, I'm serious about it, let's do it. And he said, okay.
I actually would love you to just tell me the name of your subreddit.
It's Fuck Your Headlights.
Paul started posting on Fuck Your Headlights immediately. Within a year, it had 10,000 members.
When we first created that subreddit, there wasn't a coherent theory. It really was more just about complaining and letting people know that they weren't alone in this.
As Paul and the other members of the forum tried to figure out what was really going on, they ran into the same problem that Nate Rogers had. There was just very little reliable-seeming information available about headlights.
So originally when I started Googling this, all the articles that were present on the internet blamed things, which can all really be summed up as this problem is caused by individual choices and is not systemic.
According to car manufacturers, the problem was people driving around with misaligned headlights they should get fixed, or adding those aforementioned illegal LEDs to the front of their cars. But Paul was skeptical.
There's no way everybody is, like all these soccer moms are going out and putting custom LEDs in their SUVs. I just don't see it. The people who won't touch their own vehicle are suddenly putting in their own headlights. I couldn't buy it.
But the regulating body that could theoretically take the manufacturers to task, they also said there was nothing wrong with LED headlights. There was just no problem here.
I just felt so gaslit. This is dangerous. This is affecting everybody. And the regulations do not protect you.
Paul and the other Redditors started digging for answers, measuring headlight output, researching, debating. The forum became a bustling proving ground, its members sharing information, articles, evidence, ideas, as well as videos, memes, and calls to action.
I am begging automobile manufacturers, you have got to do something about these LED headlights, because it's out of control.
There is no reason for you to be lighting up my motherfucking car like this.
What do you need permanent high beams for? Are you driving through the fog of war? Are you all on your way to light up a high school football game?
Back up or turn them down!
Soon enough, Paul and the other members of the group began to come to a consensus about the overarching problem. One that seemed self-evident and yet had been barely mentioned in the existing literature.
The word brightness was almost seemed like a faux pas. Like the people in the regulatory positions were almost avoiding any mention of the word brightness.
But the more Paul learned, the more convinced he became that overall brightness was the problem. The LEDs being installed had way too much power.
These lights are blinding everybody.
The Fuck Your Headlights subreddit now has a membership of 45,000 and counting, and it has become the hub of grassroots headlight activism, reaching out to politicians and journalists like Nate Rogers, all to get the word out that headlights are dangerously bright and something needs to be done about it.
The dream when I started was to simply make enough noise that the issue got noticed, and that was achieved actually pretty quickly. Past that, I had to think, what are we going to do with this? Like, if we have enough people mad about the same thing, can we actually use that to action something in the real world?
For Paul and much of the Fuck Your Headlights community, the issue is straightforward. All you have to do is believe your eyes. It is plain to see that headlights are emitting way too much light. Reduce that light, and the problem is largely solved. But remember how I described headlights as having a Goldilocks problem, where you don't want too much light or too little. You just want it in the right amount in the right places? Well, the players who have made headlights bright have a defense against the charge that they have put too much light on the road. They say that what you should really be worried about, what's really dangerous, is too little light.
The most compelling argument that I heard against the citizen activist approach of it's too bright is that, yeah, it might be annoying to you, but brighter light could be saving lives.
Nate Rogers.
If there's a super bright headlight and it flashes a tree that's fallen in front of you and you see that just early enough to hit the brakes and not hit it, that is a brighter headlight doing something incredible. And if the offset of that is a headlight that is kind of annoying when you're in traffic, then maybe the balance is not being read correctly by people because they're only really focusing on the thing that annoys them.
And so in order to avoid hitting not only trees, but also animals and people, we should be willing to tolerate aggravation and even discomfort. That's the argument for brighter headlights. They save lives. Whatever agitation they cause, it's worth it. So here we have two diametrically opposed arguments. One is that too much light is causing accidents and hurting people, and the other is that too little light is causing accidents and hurting people. Which is it? Well, the side that says there is too little light, the pro-bright headlight side, if you will, which includes car manufacturers, would point to a road safety test. a well-respected insurance nonprofit, studied accidents very similar to the one Nate described. Single-car collisions of the kind a driver is likely to encounter on a dark, empty road at night. And they found that headlights reduced accidents like this by 19%. That's a lot. So what safety tests the people who are against bright headlights, who say there is way too much light on the road, point to? Well, it's here that we have come to a major wrinkle, because they can't point to any safety tests, but not because glare is not a safety issue. They can't point to any safety tests because apparently nobody knows how to measure the consequences of glare.
It's just so hard for them to figure out a way to empirically prove that headlight brightness is a hazard in the way that people sense that it is.
It is apparently nearly impossible to recreate a real-world scenario in which dozens of drivers with cars of various sizes and headlight intensity are driving past and around each other, and then to isolate from that swirl of interaction the impact of glare alone.
It's really easy to prove that I hit that pedestrian because I couldn't see them because I didn't have enough light. That's very easy. It's much harder to prove that anything bad happened because I was glared.
Daniel Stern, the headlamp expert who has been fascinated by them since he was a kid.
Obviously, if you are glared and you can't see that pedestrian or that curve in the road, and you hit the pedestrian or you go flying off the road, well, there's your link between glare and traffic safety. But if you think about what a dynamic traffic situation looks like, it's going to be really hard to draw that line, because by the time the crash happens, the glare source is somewhere off behind you down the road.
Daniel says it's even harder to measure the consequences of what's called discomfort glare. Not the kind that disables your sight, but that just really bothers you.
Maybe I'm stuck in front of a vehicle with very high glare headlights in my mirrors. If I feel like I can't see while I'm driving 2.5 tons of steel at 70 miles an hour, I'm probably going to be somewhat panicked. I am probably fatigued. I might be enraged. And even if none of those are the case, I might very well unconsciously adjust my driving behaviors in unsafe ways. So there are all kinds of plausible links between discomfort, glare, and traffic safety, but trying to measure and quantify them is hideously difficult.
One area that is not quantifiable but seems really important is pedestrian deaths. As headlights have gotten more powerful, pedestrian deaths have not, as you might expect, gone down. They have instead skyrocketed. And this has not been the case in other countries, which control far more for glare. Daniel cautions that this whole issue is extremely complicated. Other countries have a different approach to just about everything about traffic safety, but still.
It does raise sort of an uncomfortable question. If U.S. headlamps and regulations are so superior to what the rest of the world uses, as U.S. regulators claim, then why are so many more American pedestrians getting hit and killed?
Overall, it seems very plausible to those well-versed in this issue that in some situations, headlight glare is doing harm. But because of the underlying data asymmetry, the fact that when it comes to LED headlights as they currently exist, we can measure how they help, but not how they hurt, the powers that be have continued to push brighter and brighter headlights. One of those powers is the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, a nonprofit funded by insurance companies that run safety tests and gives out headlight safety ratings. They told Nate they believe simply that more light on the road equals safer cars. And so car companies are making headlights that put more light on the road to get that IIHS safety rating.
They really, really want it. It says something. It's sort of like, you really want that Sundance logo on your film poster.
When it comes to safety, who has more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards? The highest level of safety you can earn? Subaru.
And so car companies direct their engineers or the third parties that are developing their headlights to make sure they get that safety rating.
That leaves one player that could curtail the trend towards brighter headlights.
the regulatory agency in charge of them. It's called the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA.
They are absolutely in charge of this and the only governing body with any authority over automotive safety.
NHTSA has heard the concerns. Multiple sources told Nate it now gets more complaints about headlights than anything else. Nevertheless, it has not updated its regulations about headlights to account for LEDs at all. And in fact, there is currently no limit whatsoever on the amount of light a headlamp can emit in certain areas. Headlights can legally be as bright as is physically possible. But a representative told Nate they stand by their regulation and blame the bulk of the problem, yet again, on LED aftermarket headlights. And so here we are, all driving on roads full of headlights optimized for a scenario, the single-car collision on a dark, empty road, in which other cars and the people who drive them do not exist. Which seems absolutely outrageous to Paul Gatto of Fuck Your Headlights.
They're not examining if it's too bright. They're not even examining if it's affecting you negatively on the road. They are simply looking at how good it is for the driver.
One of the complications here, though, is that sometimes we are the driver. Yes, we are the people being glared, but we're also the ones driving the cars doing the glaring. And that means that even though the lion's share of the blame for all of this belongs to the car companies and insurance bodies and regulators, they often have a helpful partner in all of this. Us. It turns out we like bright headlights when they're on our own cars.
You light up the road surface right close to the car and wow, it feels like you've got great headlamps. It feels like you can see everything. But there's a canyon between the light that drivers feel like they like or feel like they want and the light that drivers actually need. The headlamp that makes us feel like we've got great lighting is not the headlamp that we need in order to see well.
But if you walk into a dealership and you sit behind the wheel and test out the lights, you're probably not thinking about how headlight brightness makes everything outside its cone of light harder to see, or whether your lights are going to blind some imaginary driver at some future date. You're about to spend a lot of money on a long-lasting piece of heavy machinery, and the question you ask in that moment is simple. How well can I see? We're in a kind of headlight brightness arms race with ourselves.
The regulatory bodies allow this to happen, and car companies don't seem to be concerned with that. And this has created sort of a snowball effect that reaches down to the way that we interact with each other on the road.
Some of us are adding on those LED kits, but even more keep our high beams on all the time.
Headlights have gotten so bright that they have made people feel like, well, screw this. I'm going to get mine too. If I'm going to get blinded out there, then I might as well have as much light as possible on the road too.
In the winter of 2024, Nate Rogers published the result of his reporting, research, and thinking about headlights on the website The Ringer. In the article titled Asleep at the Wheel in the Headlight Brightness Wars, he spoke with Daniel Stern, Paul Gatto, and many others about the intricacies of the headlight problem. It was the most high-profile piece of reporting on headlight glare yet, which is increasingly becoming a mainstream issue.
Recently, it got to a point where I think just any average person totally understands and has sort of joined the movement, if you will.
The group of people actively dedicated to doing something about headlight glare can be a fractious one. They may all want the same thing, less glaring headlights, but they can't always agree on how to achieve it because they disagree about which is the most pressing problem. They do agree that regulation of some kind is in order. For Paul Gatto, the co-founder of Fuck Your Headlights, that means curbing overall brightness.
I would hopefully like to see a regulation on the total brightness of a low-beam headlight.
Daniel Stern actually agrees, though as ever, he would not use the term brightness.
Nowhere in the world is there a maximum luminance for headlamps, and I think maybe there should be.
But a limitation on luminance, basically intensity, wouldn't be his priority.
If you give me a magic wand and say you can use it once to improve things in car lighting, then I wave it and make it so that all vehicle headlights get aimed and stay aimed correctly, dynamically.
If he had 2 more wishes, he'd get rid of the blue tinge and stop headlights from getting so small, which actually also makes them appear brighter. More generally, he cautions that no matter what, there is not some quick fix.
Because it isn't a simple solution, it's a complex problem without a simple answer.
The car companies, for their part, are promoting their own solution called adaptive driving beam technology. High beams that will be able to dim automatically in the presence of another car. They're not currently available in the U.S., but have been for years in Europe, where, for what it's worth, glare complaints continue to rise. Everyone I spoke to agreed that the pressure to do something about headlights is clearly increasing, though it might be a while yet until anything happens.
Glare is having a moment. At the same time, the current U.S. administration has a very anti-regulatory bent. So if they're deleting whole agencies and saying regulations are bad, it's hard to imagine how we would get better regulations.
Headlights, in the scheme of the day's problems, seem relatively trivial. But that's exactly why the inability to do anything about them is so disheartening. The details may be complicated, but then what issue doesn't have complicated details when you really dig into it? They're still just headlights with a new kind of light bulb. Shouldn't we be able to get our hands around this one?
The worst version of super bright headlights is not going to be like a disaster. It's not going to be the end of the world. The worst version of other tech not being regulated is a disaster, and it is the end of the world. And if this is how they are handling headlights, it is not very comforting in terms of all sorts of new technology.
When we drive, we are simultaneously more powerful and more at the mercy of others than at almost any other time in our lives. When you're flying down a 2-lane highway, any car could swerve into your lane, just as you could theirs. When you're driving through an intersection, anyone could blow a stop sign, just as you could. It's terrifying, the amount of damage you can do and have done unto you in a car. Which makes it all the more incredible that most of the time, we instead engage in a collective and collaborative effort to follow the rules of the road, to do our best to keep each other and ourselves safe. These efforts have in no way turned the roadway into some kind of paradise. But that still doesn't mean it can't be degraded further, that it can't be made worse if we're not doing the bare minimum to see what's happening. This is Decoder Ring. I'm Willa Paskin. If you're a Slate Plus member, we have a new bonus episode for you, in which Slate writer Dan Kois tells us all about his quest to rediscover a famous chocolate cake from the 1960s. If you want to hear more and aren't already a Slate Plus member, you can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of the Decoder Ring show page. Or you can visit slate.com/Decoder Plus to get access wherever you listen. Slate Plus members get to listen to Decoder Ring and every other Slate podcast without any ads. They also get unlimited access to our website. Member support is crucial to our work, so please sign up. This episode was written by me and Olivia Briley, and we produced it with Max Friedman. Decoder Ring is also produced by Katie Shepard and Evan Chung, our supervising producer. Merritt Jacob is senior technical director. If you have any cultural mysteries you want us to decode, please email us at decoderring@slate.com. And you can also call us now at our new Decoder Ring hotline. That number is 347-460-7281. We love to hear any and all of your ideas for the show. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
The Supreme Court is weighing whether a right enshrined in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution really applies to everyone. What happens to the 3.6 million American babies born each year if Donald Trump gets his wish and ends birthright citizenship?
Every single one of those families will now have to scramble to provide documentation and prove the citizenship of their child and themselves in order to get that child recognized as a citizen who has a right to remain in the United States and not be deported from day one of their lives.
I'm Dahlia Lithwick, and on a recent episode of Amicus, Slate's podcast about the law in the Supreme Court, Professor Amanda Frost joined me to examine the constitutional history of birthright citizenship and the havoc Trump's executive order purporting to end it would unleash. Find new episodes of Amicus every Saturday wherever you listen to podcasts. Amicus, because legal knowledge is power.
On the latest episode of Hit Parade. By the time Nirvana released this hit in 1993, alternative rock was alternative in name only. The band's mainstream success opened the door for other underground artists and for watered-down imitators who would dominate the decade. Join me, Chris Molanphy, for a look at the rise of alternative rock in the 1990s. Follow Hit Parade wherever you get your podcasts.
To understand the larger context around Adriana Smith's case, I called up Mary Ziegler. She's a law professor at UC Davis who's written a whole bunch of books about the legal battles over reproductive rights. She says cases like Adriana Smith's, they aren't new. But before Roe v. Wade was overturned, it was a little clearer what might happen to pregnant people in crisis.
Well, often when women experienced brain death during a pregnancy, brain death at a certain point in time was treated by most hospitals as death, right? So at that point, hospitals often allowed families the decision about when to turn off life support, and sometimes even just made decisions themselves, because if patients were regarded not as being in a persistent vegetative state, for example, but actually as having passed away, those decisions weren't even always available to families.
But there have always been edge cases. Mary pointed me to one example from 1987. It was about a woman named Angela Carter. She was 27 years old, living in Washington, D.C.
Angela Carter was 26 weeks pregnant and was dying of cancer, and her condition really deteriorated quickly. And so she wasn't really in a position, because her condition deteriorated so quickly, to tell her doctors what she wanted done about her pregnancy. So the hospital went to a judge in Washington, D.C. to get an order for an emergency cesarean section, which is not what her doctors wanted or what her family wanted.
And she was like 26 weeks pregnant, right? So just on the cusp of viability.
Right. She was 26 weeks pregnant, but her doctors and her family didn't want the cesarean because they thought that Angela Carter wouldn't have wanted it either. Again, they didn't have her own words right before she passed, but that was the belief of those closest to her. And initially, a judge ordered an emergency cesarean. The baby died 2 hours after the operation. Angela Carter died 2 days later, and the case actually continued through the courts after that, with an appellate court ruling that it was an error to order the emergency cesarean because there wasn't enough evidence that that's what Angela Carter wanted.
Huh. And then in 2013, there's this case of Marlise Munoz. Her case seems really, really similar to what's happening right now in Georgia. What happened there?
Yeah, eerily similar. So Marlise Munoz was 33 and pregnant.
She was a paramedic, right?
Right. And so she collapsed on her kitchen floor, and it turned out that she had a blood clot in her lungs. And when she arrived at the hospital in the ICU, her parents and husband were told essentially that she was brain dead. She had instructions saying that she didn't want to be left on life support if she was brain dead, notwithstanding the fact that she was pregnant. And the hospital essentially said, sorry, we're going to keep her on life support anyway. She was 14 weeks pregnant at the time. And the reason for that was that Texas had a kind of ambiguous law on the books at the time that said that hospitals and other medical professionals couldn't turn off life support for pregnant patients. And that case ended up in court too.
It's so interesting because she remained on life support for a couple of months, got a lot of media attention. Eventually, her husband went to court, and he essentially sued for cruel and obscene mutilation of a corpse, which is so it's so terrible that he had to do that.
Yeah, and it's also, again, a reminder that brain death is often regarded as death, right? I mean, so he was saying this was not someone who was alive and in a coma or in a vegetative state whose living will wasn't being honored. This is someone who's dead, whose corpse was being kept on machines to serve what the hospital interpreted as the state's policy.
And that seems to me exactly what's happening in Georgia right now.
Yeah, I mean, part of what makes the Georgia case complicated, too, is that Georgia politicians disagree about whether this is a necessary result of Georgia's law. And so you may look at that and say, well, why are the people at Emory doing this and not allowing Adriana Smith's parents to make and family members to make their own decision? And I think the answer, again, is that if you're not sure what the law is, and you're the hospital, you're not going to risk the kind of criminal and civil liability that could come your way if you're wrong, right? So the incentives are all stacked by the state of Georgia to make the hospital keep her on these machines, even if some Georgia officials, like the attorney general, don't say it's necessary.
Yeah. I mean, something that stands out to me just from listening to you describe a couple of cases where women have been pregnant and have been in this awful situation. The law seems to have given a lot of deference to fetuses even before the overturn of Roe v. Wade. But now it seems like things are a little bit supercharged. Is that a fair interpretation on my part?
Yeah, so I think that there's been this fight about fetal personhood, the idea that not just that life begins at conception or that fetal life has value, but that there are full-blown rights that attach the moment an egg is fertilized. That idea was around before Roe v. Wade. That idea was around after Roe v. Wade. And the anti-abortion movement was actively trying to advance it in cases that didn't involve abortion, just like Angela Carter's, right? But now, of course, you could have an idea of fetal personhood that applied to abortion or IVF too, because there is no Roe v. Wade. So anytime a case like Adriana Smith's comes up, the stakes are that much higher for the anti-abortion movement, right? Because they're trying to build this gradual case for the U.S. Supreme Court to say that there are fetal rights across the board.
You've written that the Roe Supreme Court basically held that the 14th Amendment did not create rights before birth, and it created this barrier for fetal personhood that now doesn't exist.
Exactly. So now, anytime a case like this one rolls along, the anti-abortion movement sees it as part of a much bigger endgame than was possible when Roe was on the books, because Roe was standing in the way.
It seems to me what's happening with Adriana Smith, it's happening very specifically because she resides in the state of Georgia. What would happen if she wasn't there, if she was in another state? Are more states putting in place language involving fetal personhood that might have the same effect that we're seeing here in this case?
The answer is actually really complicated. So a lot of states have personhood language of some kind in some part of their law, even blue states. Some of those references to fetal personhood sort of fall in the category of statements of public policy. It's sort of unclear how they're meant to be enforceable, if they're meant to be enforceable at all. You may remember last year the Alabama Supreme Court had a ruling on IVF using a state wrongful death act. So it was not surprising that there's language about unborn life in the Wrongful Death Act. There were references to fetal personhood in the state law, but no one was really sure that that was going to mean a halt to IVF until the state courts got involved. So there's a lot of uncertainty in a lot of these states about whether this personhood language has teeth or not. And I don't think we're going to know until more cases like this go public.
I wonder if you look at this Georgia case with Adriana Smith and you're sensitive to the family's desires. You know, they clearly want Adriana's son to be delivered. But you also worry about the normalization of a process that's legally troublesome. Like, I look at this case and I worry a happy ending for the family becomes a precedent almost. Like, oh, this is what we do now.
Yeah, I think there is a danger of that. And I think there's also a danger in the sense that the family is not entirely being heard, right? I think because the family is on the one hand saying it's wrong that we're not the ones deciding, even if the decision we ultimately end up making is the one the law would require. Because I think what's going to happen here is if, baby Chance is delivered and is healthy and everything is fine and the family is happy with that outcome, the state is going to say, well, see, this was, the state law was right and miss the fact that the family was upset about the way this went down from beginning to end, and that other families may not want to make the same decision, and that other pregnancies may not end the same way, right? So I think there is a risk that it'll be normalizing if that's the outcome we see at the end.
Mary, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Mary Ziegler is a law professor at UC Davis and a legal historian. Her latest book is called Personhood, The New Civil War Over Reproduction. Earlier in this episode, you also heard from Imani Gandy. She's the editor-at-large for Rewire News Group. She's also the co-host of the podcast, Boom, Lawyered. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Ethan Oberman, Isabel, Angell, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go find me on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Say hello. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.
In honor of Military Appreciation Month, Verizon thought of a lot of different ways we could show our appreciation, like rolling out the red carpet, giving you your own personal marching band, or throwing a bumping shindig. At Verizon, we're doing all that in the form of special military offers. That's why, this month only, we're giving military and veteran families a $200 Verizon gift card and a phone on us with a select trade-in and a new line on select unlimited plans. Think of it as our way of flying a squadron of jets overhead while launching fireworks. Now that's what we call a celebration, because we're proud to serve you. Visit your local Verizon store to learn more. $200 Verizon gift card requires smartphone purchase $799.99 or more with new line on eligible plan. Gift card sent within 8 weeks after receipt of claim. Phone offer requires $799.99 purchase with new smartphone line on Unlimited Ultimate or Postpaid Unlimited Plus. Minimum plan $80 a month with autopay plus taxes and fees for 36 months. Less $800 trade-in or promo credit applied over 36 months. 0% APR. Trade-in must be from Apple, Google, or Samsung. Trade-in and additional terms apply.